Hi there. We're going to discuss Frankenstein, written in 1818 by Mary Shelley this time. This is a classic novel, and you know what? I bet you think you know what this book is about. I bet you think that it's about a guy that has a slightly greenish skin with bolts in his neck and a flat head that is reanimated from dead tissue and probably kills at least a couple people, and then villagers come to kill him. If you think that's what this book is about, you are quite mistaken. So what is the plot? Well, the plot is probably very close to what you expect. You have a Dr. Frankenstein. He is a member of the aristocracy, not really a count or anything, but he is well off. He lives in a castle. He stitches together some body parts. He uses electricity and some other chemicals to bring the corpse to life. The corpse comes to life and proceeds to learn about the world. If you want to discuss about the differences between the movie and the book, I am not Dominic Noble, obviously. Go watch Lost in Translation. I'm sure he's made a video on it. Probably a much better video than I can ever make on it. But anyway, why should we read this book? I mean, honestly, other than the fact that it's a classic, and it is a classic, why bother reading this book? It's because everybody does think we know what this book is about. We all think we know what this book is going to entail. It's not something that we should challenge ourselves when we think we know that, because I can tell you right now, there have been very few film adaptations of this book that have actually done it justice, and that's because the book is a lot more deep than anything that is going to be put on film. So what is this book really about? Well, let's think about when it was written and who wrote it. It was written in the year 1818 by Mary Shelley. She was married to Percy B. Shelley. And Percy B. Shelley is quite a well-known poet, romantic poet, and who was a very good friend of another romantic poet, Lord Byron. As the story goes, one night they decided to try and write ghost stories, and Mary Shelley happened to write probably the first draft of this book. It wasn't the final draft, and she developed it over time, published it, and considering that it was 1818, Mary Shelley was a female. That's something to say. I'm going to I don't know for sure. I'm not a historian, but I'm going to guess for sure just a general concept that probably not a lot of women were well-known authors at the time. Although, the Bronte sisters were around that time, so maybe I'm wrong on that. But there weren't a whole lot of female authors at the time. Let's just put it that way. So what is this book really about? Wow. Actually, it might also be best to ask, what is it not about? Because once you get below the surface of the plot, this book has a lot going on, and a lot that you might not really think about unless you think about who wrote it and what the time it was being written in. And so let's just go on a couple theories that I personally have. I'm not sure if these are official theories, but we're just going to go on a couple theories that I have. The first one, this is a horror novel. This is a horror novel written by a woman married to Percy B. Shelley. This is a horror novel written by a woman married to Percy B. Shelley while Percy B. Shelley was on vacation with his very close friend, Lord Byron. And while it's never been 100% established, how can I put this? This is going to be somewhat sensitive, but it can be somewhat inferred that Percy B. Shelley and Lord Byron were more than just male friends. They let's be honest, they were gay. They both had wives. At the time, I'm sure they had that for appearance purposes. And personally, I don't care if a person is gay, but at the time, that was a important thing and to be kept quite secret. And so, this is a book about a man living on his own, creating the reanimated body of another man that he was basically, he was creating things without a woman. So, I mean, there is that. And actually, if you look at the old James Whale movies, that is a large portion of what James Whale was getting at with those movies. Let's go on to a different thing. How about this? This was a book written about a man creating life without the input of a woman. It's somewhat related to the first theory, but I mean, this is more of a more generalized female worry. What would happen if men could create new life without having to worry about women, without having to have a woman give birth? What if they could just start giving birth, on their own? It's basically Mary Shelley worrying that the progress of the time, because in 1818 there were the first glimmers of the Industrial Revolution happening, and obviously science was progressing quite well. I mean, it wasn't exactly the Renaissance anymore, but the science was progressing quite well, and so. Obviously, just like nowadays, when we're worried about artificial intelligence taking over, I can assume at the time women might have been somewhat worried. It's like, oh my goodness, will we become completely, obsolete? Just like a lot of people nowadays are worried about AI making them obsolete. Women might be worried because at the time, women weren't exactly a big deal in the workforce. They weren't doctors. They weren't psychiatrists. They weren't much of anything other than property for their husbands. So we can sort of say this was also a worry about women becoming obsolete. So this is almost a horror novel written for women, even though obviously it's not exactly a highly read book by feminists, but it does explore female worries. There is a then obviously there is a third one of a man usurping the role of God, of creating life on his own without and taking that over, which at the time, since religion was a little bit more prominent in the world, obviously that was a bit of horror to the novel. It was obviously something that would have added to the visceral reaction that readers would have to this novel. But also there is a fourth one that I think is so obvious that I think a lot of people don't really even talk about it. The monster in this novel. And we're just going to call it the monster because Frankenstein is the name of the doctor. The monster learns, he develops, he becomes his own person. He is not the sum of his parts. He is more than the sum of his parts. That's an important thing to consider, because that's what we all kind of have to do during our lives. But it's very important to remember that we can do that. And I think it's important that a woman was writing a novel about that, because I think I think Mary Shelley was worried that she was being relegated to the role of, as in my first theory, a prop. And obviously Mary Shelley was much more than just a prop, because we're still reading her book over 200 years later. What was it? Something like 207 years later. So, I mean, she was obviously more than just a prop. She had more going on with her brain than anybody else thought. She knew more. She was a better writer than many people. And so it's important to say that the monster learns. He becomes his own person, and then he turns on his master. Perhaps this is a feminist novel to begin in the end, because it may have been that Mary Shelley was saying that women could rise up and try to turn on the people that tried to act as their masters. I kind of like that theory. I don't know, but these are all just theories of mine. Discuss them how you want. I mean, I may be totally off base here, but I mean, in the final estimation of this book, please go out and read this book. It's a very good book. It's very well written. It's incredibly gripping, and it has a lot to think about. There's probably some theories that I haven't even thought of yet for what this book might actually be about in its subtext. But also be prepared. It was written in 1818. The language it uses is not easy to read, especially for the eyes of people in the 2020s. But if you can get past that, it's a relatively thin novel. Go ahead and read it. You might like it. You might not. But, at least be able to say you've read the classics. Anyway, that's my thoughts. Have a great day. Stay positive. Bye-bye.